Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining our 2019 Stanford Fund President's Circle leadership call. And I'm delighted to have you all here. We are joined by Craig Falkenhagen, who's going to be our moderator, along with Susie Brubaker-Cole. Craig is from the class of '74. He earned his BS and MS in engineering, followed by an MBA in 1989. Craig retired from Bank of America's Project Finance Group, and before that worked at Exxon in various upstream engineering operations and corporate planning assignments. Craig currently sits on the board of Stanford's Institute for Research in the Social Sciences and the Stanford Lead Council, and he served as national chair of the Stanford Fund and as the chair of the Alumni Committee on Trustee Nominations. He has also co-chaired numerous class reunion fundraising campaigns, including this year, and worked on the board of the Buck Cardinal Club and the Board of Governors of Stanford Associates. In 2007, Craig was awarded the Stanford Medal for his volunteer service to Stanford. Craig is going to be taking us over on the call now, and he'll be introducing Susie and taking some questions. Some of those have been submitted by you ahead of time. After we've gotten through a few of those questions, we'll open up the call for your questions, which you can submit via the Zoom chat or via email. We're looking forward to a robust conversation here, and we're expecting this to end sometime between 11:45 and 12. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Craig.
Well, thank you, Amy. And I can report welcome to the call, everybody. And report it's another beautiful day on the Stanford campus. Driving up Palm Drive this morning, the banner's out for commencement weekend. The banners are up on Campus Drive. The place looks fantastic. Just another day in paradise. So to everyone joining us today, welcome to another President's Fund stakeholder call. Our contributions account for more than 50% of the total funding of the Stanford Fund. And just to be sure, let me remind you how important the Stanford Fund actually is to Stanford University. Unlike long-term endowment gifts with specific fixed purposes that usually are locked in by agreement between donors and Stanford, the money we give each year to the Stanford Fund provides much-needed flexible annual support. With this flexibility, President Tessier-Levine has the powerful ability to respond to immediate needs, unexpected opportunities, and fresh ideas that benefit our undergraduates. In addition, our gifts help fund need-based undergraduate financial aid, that part that isn't already covered by endowment, academic innovation, student life, including support for more than 100 student groups, ranging from club sports, performing arts groups, to public service organizations. Thank you so much for your support. It really, really helps. And now, speaking of student life, on to the main event. Susie Brubaker-Cole has been Stanford's Vice Provost for Student Affairs since the fall of 2017. She oversees a division that touches our students in all their activities outside the classroom, including residential life and more areas that we'll hear about shortly. In returning to Stanford in 2017, Susie joined that so-called group of boomerangers who leave the farm, get homesick for the sandstone and red tile roofs, and ultimately return to the place where they really belong. Her hiatus began in 2008 when she moved north to join Oregon State University's Student Affairs Division. Susie ultimately rose to the position of Vice Provost for Student Affairs at OSU, the same title she now holds at Stanford, but the Stanford job's much harder.
Harder and better.
Exactly, okay. In her first tour of duty at Stanford from 1999 to 2008, Susie served as Associate Vice Provost for Undergraduate Education, leading academic advising, undergraduate research, honors programs, academically themed living learning programs, and graduate fellowship and scholarship advising. She also was a resident fellow in freshman sophomore college, one of our undergraduate dorms. For the past year, Susie has been engaged in co-leading the ResX task force with Harry Elam, our Vice Provost for Undergraduate Education. The task force recently presented their final report, A Vision for Stanford's Undergraduate Residences, to the Board of Trustees, and they now are working to begin implementation on many of the recommendations. We'll look forward to hearing more about this initiative. Susie, welcome to the call.
Thank you so much, Craig. It's great to be here on this, like you said, beautiful day on the Stanford campus. The campus is filling up with parents and family members and is a photo opportunity around every corner. So it's nice to be able to bring some folks who aren't on campus today into this call and give some updates on what's happening around.
Okay, well, are you ready for my questions?
Let's dive in.
Okay, fantastic. My first question for you. Tell us about what the Office of Student Affairs does and what parts of undergraduate life you're responsible for. It sounds like everything. I took a quick look at your website, and I was astounded by the size and scope of your responsibilities. This is just randomly naming a few in no particular order: the Asian American Activities Center, the Career Center, known as, is it the Beam Stanford Career Center now? Is that?
Beam Stanford Career Education.
Okay.
Yep.
Student Financial Services, Bechtel International Center, Tressiter Meeting Services, really?
Yeah.
Fraternity and sorority life, residential education, student health, plus another 15 or 20 programs, administrative duties, and you run the registrar's office too.
That too. How does all that fit together?
So what else? Tell us about student affairs.
I think I'll start by telling a little story about what student affairs is really about. So I was in a retreat earlier this quarter with the ASSU exec group, and we were asking them some questions about what they think some of the most important things are that we think about together for the next year. And one of the students said, what I'm really thinking about is the fact that we all come here, of course, wanting to graduate as better students, but just as much, if not more, we want to graduate as better human beings, better people. And that has stuck with me as a great encapsulation of what student affairs does. We are about helping students become better people, become more themselves. Now, of course, a lot of that happens in the classroom. It's not just intellectual development, it's personal development as well. But we do a lot of work alongside students and colleagues all over campus to ensure that learning and growth and development happens everywhere that students interact on campus. And fun, too. So it involves all of those departments and units you talked about. It's really diverse. There's a lot of different people some are very general in their work with students, some are very specialized. Some of the more specialized roles are our clinical roles. We have Vaden Health Center and CAPS, Psychological Counseling Services. Some of the technical work that happens in the registrar's office is very specialized, so it's a really wide range of things that we do for our students. I think probably the best part of my job across all of those different components of student life is that the core of my job in all of those areas is to create a superb experience for the incredibly diverse Stanford students we have today. And to borrow from something that one of my mentors has taught me in the past, who is a former vice provost for student affairs, he said, well, our job really, Susie, is to believe in other people's children, no matter what the circumstances. And that is the joy. Isn't that great? That is the joy of what I do every day. There's never a dull moment. It's fun. It's challenging. It's complex. And I feel like in this work, I am shaping the future of Stanford and the future of communities all over the world for the great human beings that we're helping to develop here.
And I was interested to see on your website a page that just says, what is our most important work? Could you go through that?
Absolutely. So when I came into Stanford, my first job was to understand what's going on today at Stanford. And so I drew on all kinds of data, survey research, demographic data, focus groups with students, focus groups with faculty, to ask what is the most important work that we need to do for today's students and tomorrow's students. And that comes down to 5 big themes in no particular order.
Okay.
The first is equity and inclusion, recognizing we have an incredibly diverse student body, and we want all students to have a great experience and to experience a deep sense of belonging, which goes to our second theme, which is belonging and community. That is a great contributor to students being powerful learners on campus. When people don't feel a deep sense of belonging, there's a ton of research that shows that you're not an effective learner in the same ways. That's a big theme for us. Third is mental health and well-being, and I hope we'll have a chance to talk some more about that because that's one of the toughest and most important issues that we face. The fourth is what we call integrative learning, making sure that students have an opportunity to fit all the different components of their Stanford experience into something that's greater than the sum of the parts. And then the last is house in order, recognizing that we have precious, limited resources that we need to make the most of. And we need to have our house in order in our policies, our functions, our financial management to do great work for students. So that's our most important work defined in our division today.
With all the different areas and activities, you have programs, offices that affect so many people. What is a typical day like for the Vice Provost of Student Affairs?
So that's a great question. And I think that my best answer is that with the dynamics of our campus and our students, there's no typical day. But a typical day would involve probably 300 to 400 emails coming in, which I have to triage. on all range of issues. And I, of course, hand those off to some of my staff. A typical day, it always involves working with a team of people to plan programs, whether it's new social life programs on campus or to solve problems. A typical day also usually involves a couple meetings with other Stanford leaders, and it might be Harry from Vice Provost for Undergraduate Education, or Patty Gumport, who's our outgoing Vice Provost for Graduate Education, because of course we work with graduate and undergraduate students. I always eat lunch every day. I've never skipped lunch since I came, but it's a busy day of constantly interacting with people.
Wow.
And there's usually an evening event a couple days of the week too, which is a joy. So it could be a concert with students, it could be a dinner with students in a dorm, or a meeting with one of the student organizations.
So I know things have changed quite a bit since I was here in the 70s and then in the 80s again, when dinosaurs still roamed the inner quad. You were here starting in the early 2000s, I think. And I'm wondering, what changes have you observed in your tenure at Stanford through two different periods? Changes in student attitudes, what issues are important to students? Can you describe the character profile of the student body? What are they like?
Yeah, that's a great question. Oh, there are some things that I observe that are the same and that feel really, really Stanford. So there still is this wonderful culture of irreverence that I just love. It's wacky, it's irreverent, it's quirky, and that's still here. So that's the same. I've also noticed that students today and of yesterday are engaged. They are busy. They're probably too busy today, but they're engaged in, we have over 600 student clubs and organizations on campus. They're looking at internships, undergraduate research. They're student staff in the dorms. They're busy and they're engaged and they're deeply, deeply invested in the life of campus. So I think that probably the biggest difference that I'm observing today is in the level of stress and anxiety that students are carrying. And that derives from a lot of different sources. We could have a whole 2-hour phone call and touch just a corner of that. But, I think that that's a huge difference, is that students are coming in to campus as freshmen in a state, I would say, of depletion in ways that was not the case 10 years ago. And I'm borrowing that word from the director of our Counseling and Psychological Services office, so it's very well informed. They're a little bit exhausted from their high school experiences, and some have missed some really important developmental experiences in high school because they've worked so hard to get here. And we're seeing the results of that. I think the second big difference that I would observe is in students' engagement in political and campus activism. When I was here 2000 to 2008, that was not a thing. And it was a function of the time. And now it is a thing. Students are distressed about the geopolitical state of the world. And that plays out in their engagement with some campus issues. And it plays out in the way that they feel very acutely affected by broader issues around the world. And they come in as change agents. They want to be change agents. And that's happening on campus. And that's really different from when I was here before.
So being a student in the early 70s here, I missed the late 60s, but there was still some residual. And is it like that? Is that what it feels like? Or?
I think so. So I went to a fascinating panel called Take Back the Night 1968, I think was the name. And it was a group of African-American alums who were here in 68 and were major student activists. And it was fascinating to watch today's students listening to those students. And I think there were a lot of parallels in the desire to affect really positive change for racial equity, for stronger engagement in some of the world issues today. So what does it feel like on a day-to-day basis? Well, we have students plan a protest for White Plaza. There was a protest, or a demonstration, I should say, to wake people up to the realities of climate change and global warming, and to demand a fossil fuel Stanford. There was a rally, I don't know, maybe 4 weeks before that in White Plaza that also marched down to Building 10 and delivered a petition to encourage the university to have more robust resources for mental health and well-being, which I can speak to a little later. We have answered that, I think, very ably. But it is petitioning, it's demonstrating, it's marching. All those things are happening on campus.
Okay. So you worked on the residence task force. You actually co-chaired it with Harry Elam, and you recently submitted your final report to the Board of Trustees. It sounds like some of the things that you're talking about as issues are probably addressed by the task force. Can you go through the key points and
Absolutely.
recommendations?
Yep. So the task force started by asking what are the overarching educational and student development principles that we want to guide the design of the residences in the future. So we started with big principles, and we did literature reviews, we interviewed a lot of people, and we decided the big three issues that need to be addressed in our and renewed in our residences are health and well-being, number one; number two, community and belonging; and number three, intellectual and personal growth. And those are in kind of rank order of what we thought the issues are for the near future. So that's kind of the big thematic piece.
And then there was a talk in what I was reading, the press release that came out about a neighborhood concept. What's that about?
Yeah, so the neighborhoods are the core of our vision moving ahead into the future. We imagine neighborhoods to be the center of students' feeling of having a home and a community at Stanford, and a very dynamic community for sure. It has a lot of different types of students and organizations in it, but a place where students will really feel home and a sense of belonging. So a neighborhood will be a cluster of somewhere around 7 to 10 residences, mostly geographically focused in one area on campus, about 700 students per neighborhood. And in the long term, we would divide the campus into 10 different neighborhoods. We want each neighborhood to have its own personality and flavor. We want students to develop those. But we think that the neighborhood will be a great way to create strong relationships among students, but also among students and the professional staff and the faculty in the residential system who provide really critical support for students' mental health, for their well-being, for their planning and their time at Stanford, and anchor them in a really robust, healthy, vibrant individual experience at Stanford.
And then from what I could gather from my reading was freshmen would be distributed throughout the neighborhoods. There'd be upperclassmen.
That's right.
And then various kinds of living groups and all together in that world.
So neighborhoods will have a variety of different kinds of housing, but we decided in this task force to commit to all frosh housing. We don't currently meet the demand for all frosh housing at Stanford, and we want to do that. So every neighborhood would have some all frosh housing. Every neighborhood would also have some upper class housing, and every neighborhood would have some more independent style housing, not a typical dorm, but maybe be suite style or row house style affiliated with it. We really like the developmental arc that creates, where there's an intensely supported experience in an all frosh dorm, and over the years it moves to more and more independent and student-driven experiences in those different types of residences. We also imagine a community commons in every neighborhood that would, of course, have dining, because food is culture, food is community, and that's really important. But there in the community commons would be the offices of all the professional staff who work with students, or academic advisors, the residence dean, and spaces for students to host meetings, to have events, and where they can get creative and do all kinds of fun stuff there.
Okay, so considering your recommendations, the big question, what could be the fate of those cherished edifices of Wilbur and Stern Hall? Let us in on the news.
Oh, well, we would love to be able in the future to replace Wilbur, Stern, and I will add to those list of cherished edifices, Crothers and Flomo. Yes, yes. So, those buildings have served well over the years, but they really don't have the type of community spaces and spaces for faculty to live in as resident fellows and for professional staff to be present to make for the really lively home feeling of a neighborhood that we want. So ideally, Wilbur, Stern, Crothers, and Flomo over time would be replaced with a more modernized structure.
Well, we'll watch what happens. And
wish us luck.
It's going to be interesting. Okay, so you talked about the neighborhood structure, and that's kind of going to anchor the ResX concept. How do you see fraternity and sorority life, ethnic community dorms, and theme dorms fitting into the new structure?
So all three of those types of housing are, I would say, treasures of the Stanford experience, and we fully intend for those to continue under ResX in the neighborhood model. They're great examples of community and belonging on campus today, and they need to remain great examples of community and belonging and friendships on campus in the future. So these types of houses will be distributed across the neighborhood. So each neighborhood would have some of those types of houses, although there's only 4 ethnic themed dorms, so not every neighborhood would have one, but they would be in a neighborhood. We are working on figuring out how best to do this. We have a big picture vision of continuing with those houses. In the future, we're working with our campus architect to design this. We have a lot of details to work out, but I'll give you a little more detail. My plan currently is for the foreseeable future to continue to have 10 Greek houses on campus, and we'll figure out how best to divide those up and configure that in the neighborhoods. We also will, of course, continue to have the 4 ethnic theme dorms, and we'll continue to have frosh in the 4 ethnic theme dorms. That would be one of the exceptions to all frosh dorms, because we know that that's a treasured experience for frosh to be in an ethnic theme dorm. And then some of the other theme dorms on campus, like Casa Italiana, the Humanities House, we also envision that those will continue to be theme dorms in the ResX neighborhood model. So continuing all of it, we've got a lot of details to work out for implementation, and we're bringing together teams of students, faculty, and staff to dive into those more detailed implementation questions, figure out how to do it best for ResX.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Could you talk a little bit about student health, well-being?
Yeah.
Where are we now? My experience goes way back to the days of Cal Health Center. So bring me up to date and some other.
So I'll begin by saying that mental health is probably one of the single greatest issues on all campuses today. When I meet with my counterparts across the country, this is what we talk about, is concern about students' mental health. It's different today than it was even 10 years ago. And I actually brought a little bit of data with me to share because I think it illustrates some of what we're talking about. So every year we survey incoming frosh and we survey upper class students. And here's what we found in recent years. Last year, frosh, 38% of frosh reported coming into Stanford that they had felt overwhelmed by all they had to do in the recent past. And 8% of frosh, which is 116 frosh coming in, felt so depressed that they found it difficult to function.
Wow.
Yeah, so 8% doesn't sound like a lot, but when you think about 116 students coming in with that, that's something really serious you have to take into account. I also brought a little bit of data on a very acute indicator of mental health issues on campus, which is the number of psychiatric hospitalizations we have each year. So over the last 5 years, this is 2014 to 2017, we had an average of 58 psychiatric hospitalizations per year, which I think sounds like a lot. So these are students who are experiencing such an acute mental health crisis that they needed to be hospitalized in a psychiatric ward. In the 2017-18 year, we had 77 psychiatric hospitalizations, and we are on track this year to meet or probably eclipse that 77.
Is that right?
So we've seen a significant increase in the number and the acuity of mental health cases we're seeing on campus. CAPS, our Counseling and Psychological Services, would tell us that by far the most prevalent diagnosis and condition that they see is anxiety and some sort of anxiety disorder. It's also worth noting that nationally, we're seeing the average onset age for major mental health illness, so that would be major depressive episode, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, declining. So many more students come to Stanford already having experienced a serious mental health issue in the past and come here. And many are very highly successful, and we support them through accommodations and good services on campus and continuity of care from home to here. But we also see a number of students coming to campus and having an onset of a major mental health issue, and those are very challenging and require a lot of care to work with.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, now at this point, we're going to open up the call for questions from audience members.
Sounds great.
And so for everybody out there listening, if you have a question or comment for Susie Brubaker-Cole, you can use the WebEx app to submit it via the chat function, or you can send an email to Amy Wilson, our director of the Stanford Fund, sitting here as we talk. And Amy's email address at Stanford is amywill, AMYWIL, at stanford.edu. And we'll also be referencing questions that some of you submitted ahead of time. So let's see. We've got one from Nikos who asks, I would love to hear your perspective on how Greek life fits in. To be honest, some of the alumni I'm in touch with feel like there's been a concentrated attack on Greek life at Stanford over the last year or so. And I'll add that we actually received several questions along these lines besides the one that Nikos sent in. Students who had experienced Greek life at Stanford and who were concerned that the Greek system could be minimized or maybe pushed out. You addressed the role of Greek life in the new neighborhood system already, but could you speak more about just the role, role you see for Greek life at Stanford, and specifically what's being done to ensure that it remains a vibrant and healthy part of the community?
Well, I want to thank Nikos for asking the question, because I also hear a lot of kind of buzz around Greek life. And honestly, I hear a lot of misperceptions about what's happening with Greek life and what Stanford thinks about Greek life. So I'm going to speak unambiguously and say, I support Greek life at Stanford. And I know the president and the provost do too, but I'm the one that oversees it mostly. So I support Greek life at Stanford. Greek life brings so much to our community that is valued. It brings great community and friendships for students who opt in. It brings incredible leadership experiences for students, wonderful alumni networks, and great contributions to the campus in the tone it sets around service to community, some of the social events that are hosted. And it's a really great component of Stanford life. Not for all students, and that's fine. We never imagined it would be. So I mentioned earlier, and I'll reiterate, that it is my intention to continue to have 10 Greek houses on campus for the foreseeable future.
Fraternities and sororities.
Correct, fraternities and sororities, yep. And I've phrased it in terms of houses, not chapters, because there is one house right now that has 2 chapters living in it, which is an interesting experiment. I think that that's something we want to continue into the future, and I feel very confident we'll do that. I also want to say that I think part of the reason that people have felt that Greek life is under attack is there's some problems in Greek life on campus today. I'm going to be really honest about this. I want Greek life to be excellent at Stanford. Why would we settle for anything less? Some of the issues that I'm concerned about in Greek life today are the diversity and inclusion in some Greek chapters. I am aware of instances of hazing, very unsafe drinking and drug use culture in chapters, unsound recruitment practices, and these are things that we should not settle for. We should hold ourselves to high standards and hold ourselves accountable when things go wrong. I'm also aware that there are a number of chapters that don't currently have housing, that are thriving chapters and want to have access to housing. So we have 26 chapters total, Greek chapters on campus right now, and we have 10 Greek houses. That's a problem we need to address in the future. And we need to find a way to make sure that all of our chapters can thrive.
Getting back to health and well-being, and then you mentioned alcohol as well. I'm reminded of when I heard Provost Etchemendy many years ago, I think, as we were attending a meeting like Stanford parents, saying, please help us with the alcohol problem by, coaching and having influence on your own student. What's the alcohol situation like on campus overall right now? So
a little bit of data to start. First, we are looking mostly at high-risk drinking situations. That's what we're worried about. Mm-hmm. I know that there's alcohol on every campus, and there always will be. It's a part of American culture, but there should not be the degree of high-risk drinking that we're seeing on campuses that there are today. So currently, approximately 35 to 40% of the overall undergraduate population self-reports engaging in binge drinking, which is a high consumption of alcohol in a short amount of time in the last 2 weeks. Yeah.
Wow.
That's a lot. Now, I'm going to share with you something else. We disaggregated that data by different student populations, and we found that students who are members of Greek organizations have almost double the binge drinking rate of students who don't engage in a Greek chapter. So we're very concerned about that from a perspective of developing addiction. The developing late adolescent brain is very susceptible to addictive patterns. We're very concerned about it for students' health and well-being. And I will be honest with you that I'm concerned about it from a fundamental safety perspective. It's not a mystery that there have been a number of kind of near misses on our campus where students have been intoxicated to the point of being near fatality.
Or something. Okay.
And that has happened, of course, on campuses around the country. And we need to do more to combat these high-risk drinking practices on campus. We currently have a group of faculty, students, and staff called the Alcohol Solutions Group, working on designing some solutions to help address the problem. They're going to be delivering a report to me and the provost in probably about a month and a half, and I'm hopeful that will provide us some really good solutions.
Okay, we had a question that came in via our callers, from one of our callers. As you've thought about the neighborhood and strategy, are you worried about students having a more narrow or self-segregated experience?
That's a great question. This came up with a lot of frequency in the outreach we did during ResX, and it's interesting. We heard from students that they experience the current system as narrowing and self-segregating. We had a lot of discussion about what that means and came to the conclusion that one of the most important educational goals that we need to fulfill is ensuring that our students become very experienced and adept at interacting with people who are different from themselves. I think that's one of the biggest challenges we face as a society today, is conflict around exactly that.
Right.
And so our vision is that the neighborhood will not be self-segregating because it will reflect, each neighborhood will be a microcosm of the overall student population.
Right.
And I don't think it will be too narrow or self-segregating because we've conceived of the possibility for students to spend a year out of their neighborhood by going to one of the university theme houses that would be in another neighborhood. So let's just say that you get assigned to, and I won't say Wilbur because we don't want that to be, let's say we get assigned to the Gerhard Casper neighborhood. I'm making this up.
Okay.
But over in the Lagunitas neighborhood is the Ujima theme house, or maybe a theme house on sustainability, where you could choose to spend a year leaving your Gerhard Casper neighborhood and going to one of those theme houses to experience a different community, which I think is a great way of striking a right balance.
Absolutely.
Students love choice at Stanford, and we wanted to have some choice in the system, but not too much choice, which is what we think the current case is. So I think we struck a really nice balance between those.
Okay. We have a question from Susan, who, well, first of all, she says, I'm interested to hear about residential life on campus so many years after, get this, the Manzanita Trailer Park.
Oh my God.
Wow. That was an interesting chapter in student housing at Stanford, Susan. I do remember the trailers myself. I never lived in them. Okay, so she goes on to ask, I would like to know how you currently place transgender students in housing, and if there are many single room options, freshmen as well, for students who have social or health issues.
Yeah, great questions. Good. So for incoming frosh, we ask confidentially in their intake materials if they have any individual needs, and we ask individual needs such as sexual orientation and gender identity. And so students confidentially self-report to us if they have those needs, and then we are very careful to match frosh with roommates who don't necessarily share the same sexual orientation or gender identity, but absolutely are welcoming and accepting of all sexual orientations and gender identities. And we estimate that about 20 to 25 students annually are served in this way, and it's worked out really well. Now, for sophomores, juniors, and seniors, this is less of an issue since they select their own roommates and go through the draw in that way. We also seek to make all kinds of bathrooms available to students in residences, so male, female, gender inclusive, and single use. Overall, we find that Stanford students are incredibly inclusive in this regard, and I think that things are working well. Now, for health issues, students who are in need of a single room, our Office of Accessible Education provides accommodations both in housing and dining based on medically documented disabilities, which of course can be mental health disability as well. Each student's needs are determined on an individualized case-by-case basis, and students are frequently assigned to single rooms in order to accommodate those needs. One of the things we're hoping to do in the ResX, particularly with some of our new neighborhoods that we hope to construct, is ensure that we have an adequate number of a variety of different types of rooms that could meet students' needs with disabilities across the whole campus.
Okay. Let's see, here's a question from Josh, who asked about the political climate on campus. And his impression that some conservative perspectives could be being suppressed. So here's his question. Will Stanford commit to standing by decisions to invite speakers regardless of their political ideology and affiliation, despite the known risk of student protest boycott? in an effort to showcase its commitment to free speech and providing exposure to rich and diverse ideologies.
Yep. So my first part answer is yes, and I'll share a little more detail on that in a minute. But I am very concerned that a number of our students with more conservative political leanings are feeling hesitant to speak up in class, are feeling small in number, are feeling that they maybe don't quite have the same voice on campus because it tends to be more liberal leaning political perspective. So I'm very concerned about that, and we need to do some work to self-correct on that. But I have, on a number of occasions over my 2 years here, sat in very difficult conversations with students who have asked the university to cancel speakers because they felt that their viewpoints would be hurtful to some members of campus. These are very complex conversations, but we have stood by the value of bringing a variety of perspectives to campus. We also respect the right of everyone on campus to exercise counter speech, and we hope that they will do so. But yes, that is how we're working through these problems.
And how do students tend to treat each other from a respect point of view? Are people respectful of others' views pretty much, or do you have any,
it's the entire spectrum of possibilities. If you want to do some searches back through the daily for the last year, you'll see there have been some instances of very contentious, difficult, and I would say hurtful and inappropriate interactions between students of different political viewpoints. But there have also been a number of instances of students having very productive, contested, respectful, and civil conversations around political differences. So it's the full spectrum we're seeing. But yeah, we've got some problems around that, and we are not alone in that in the country. And I'm concerned about that. I'm concerned about whether we're doing enough at Stanford to help students practice the art of respectful, heartfelt, passionate disagreement.
Okay, thank you. Here's a question from Tom. How are athletes integrated into campus life? Do they eat in the same dining halls, or do they have their own athletes-only training tables for meals?
That's a great question, and it's really complex. So the demands on athletes' time are extraordinary between practice, competition, travel schedules, training, and I don't know what to call it when you meet with a trainer when you're injured.
Sure.
Why I forget that. You know what I'm talking about.
And team meetings.
Team
when
meetings,
you're not lifting,
all of that, really tough. So this year we, and they also have different nutritional needs when they're in season. Their caloric intake is different from the typical Stanford student. So we have experimented with some things this year that open our dining halls later to try to, create some good integration for athletes in the dining halls when they can't make it for the regular meal times. And some of that was effective and some of it wasn't. So we're assessing over the summer and thinking about how we can do better. It may be that we'll decide that they would be helpful for the student athletes, given the extraordinary demands on their times, to have a few in-season training tables. We haven't concluded that yet, but we have to make sure they're getting the nutrition they need and are participating in Stanford community, living alongside other students and eating alongside, but their lives are different, and we cannot pretend that they can do the exact same things as all students.
Okay, thanks. And then here's a question that came in. I think this is outside of your area, except that you're involved with ResX, but okay, the housing draw.
Oh yeah.
How's that going to work?
Oh, great question. We thought about this long and hard during ResX. So the sense overall is that the draw is, as it currently exists, is very disruptive in students' lives. We heard from students that this reshuffling annually of community made it hard to stay in touch with friends, was disruptive to community, and it kind of created a sense of social isolation a little bit for students. So under ResX, we've conceived of the draw as something very different. It would take place within neighborhood annually, and there wouldn't be the same very complex system of tiers and priorities. It would be based on class year. So rising seniors would get first priority, rising juniors, rising sophomores. And then, of course, we would place Frosh into the all-Frosh dorms or mid.
Got it. Okay. And does anybody live off campus these days?
Oh, it's so few students living on campus.
And just because of the high cost and everything's happening right here.
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah, that's what I was.
I mean, I don't know the exact number, but I think 98% of undergraduates live on campus.
Okay, we have another question. And let's see if I can understand. The questions are pouring in here. Okay, this is from Josh. What percent of students let's see, what percent of students of the 26 Greek organizations represent? How many people are in Greek organizations? What percent about?
Yeah.
And if we only have 10 organizations who are going to be in the new system, why is it being capped at 10? And then I love, doesn't that create a Hunger Games dynamic? Oh my
yeah.
God.
This is a great question. I don't actually have the numbers in front of me, Josh, to answer what percentage of the 26 Greek organizations, of the students does the 26 Greek organizations represent. But there are more than 10 organizations that desire to live in housing. I'm leaving it at 10 currently because there's also a number of students who don't want to have themed housing. They want to live in general row houses without a theme. And there's a number of students in theme houses that want to maintain those. So it's striking a balance between different student communities and the different desires for what they want their row houses to be configured like. Now, it's possible, and yes, it does create a little bit of a Hunger Games dynamic. And I'm interested to see if when we design how Greek life is going to fit into ResX, if we can do something to move out of that Hunger Games dynamic. So I'm really interested in that question. I'm going to be pulling together a group of students, staff, and alumni to come up with some scenarios on how we might twist out of that dynamic.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I get the final question.
Okay.
Tell us about commencement. What are the plans? Who's the speaker? What's going on? Do you participate?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah, so Tim Cook is the speaker, the
That's
head
right.
of Apple.
Okay.
I think that his advanced team is on campus right now, checking out the scene and looking at how they're going to move him from space to space. My role in commencement is really fun. I get to be the first person that sets foot onto the field when commencement begins.
Okay.
And
so the wacky walk.
That's right. I lead the wacky walk, but I'm not wearing anything wacky. I'm wearing my Yale PhD robe, and it's somewhat sedated compared to what many of the students are going to be wearing. But I've already heard that there's some great, groups. They call them floats, I guess. Sometimes big group things happening. Very creative. And we're looking forward to it. The other big news about commencement is it's not going to be hot. 2 years ago, it was, 105 degrees. It was just an inferno out there.
Oh.
We had a heat wave here 2 days ago, and I heard that the crew that was setting up the stage was experiencing 125 to 130 degrees on the field.
Wow.
It's a new stage this year, which I'm really excited about. It's been redesigned with some new colors and design. I saw a mock-up of it. It's gorgeous, so if folks can access I think there's going to be a live feed to take a peek at the new stage. That would be worth it.
Oh, great. Okay.
Yeah.
And what's your advice to anybody who will be attending?
Cheer for everyone, because every one of these students has done such amazing things on this campus.
Okay, great.
Perfect.
Well, unfortunately, at this point, we are going to have to wrap things up unless Amy has something to say beforehand.
Just a quick, I wanted to say thank you, Craig and Susie, for this conversation. It's been really wonderful and very interesting. And I wanted to let everyone know on the phone that we will have a recording of this available, and we will be sending it out in the next couple of days for those of you who maybe missed a part or would like to listen in again. So thanks so much to everyone on the phone for joining, and thank you, Craig.
Okay, so as we wrap things up and leave the wonderful world of palm trees, red tile roofs, and sandstone, and cardinal and white, we've got to return to our real jobs, the real world now. But before we adjourn, I first of all want to thank all of you for participating, and thank you for your support of the Stanford Fund. It is really, really important to the university, and we do appreciate it. Also, I want to thank Stanford Fund Director Amy Wilson and the wonderful group she leads for all their hard work behind the scenes for us and for Stanford. And finally, thank you, Susie Brubaker-Cole. I have no idea how you could take a whole hour of your time to come and join us. But anyway, thank you for giving us just a privileged view of this colorful and exciting world of student affairs that you lead at Stanford. You're the best.
Thank you.
Thank you all, and the call is now adjourned.
All right. Great.